morning, friends. Today, I want to talk to you about how do you know when it's time to pump your septic system? I get asked this question a lot, and I think it's a very important question to kind of discuss. And I think that there's a lot of different opinions that exist out there, and that's okay. Let's get into it. So, you're getting your septic, you just bought a house, you have a septic system, you're getting it looked at, you're trying to figure out, when do I need to pump this thing out? I'm not 100% sure. Well, they make a product for that, right? But before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about what is a septic system. So a septic system is basically going to be your on-site sewage disposal system. That's basically going to be everything that you flush down the toilet, run down the sink. It's got to go somewhere. This is how you deal with it, right? So in our area, you're generally going to have 2 system components at least. Sometimes, depending on the soil and the design, you might have 3, 4, 5 different components. In our area, you're going to have a tank and an absorption system. What is that, right? The tank is just one large concrete box that everything falls into and settles, right? The heavy stuff goes to the bottom, lighter stuff floats up top. We refer to those as sludge on the bottom and scum on the top, with the fancy term for the poo water in the middle as effluent, right? So, you have all the solids in the tank, now you got to deal with the liquids. What do? So, it's all gravity fed in this particular setup, right? You got your tank that the solids separate into, and then you got the water you got to get rid of, and then that's going to overflow out of the tank into a thing called a distribution box, which will then disperse that liquid into the drain fields. The drain fields are just going to be basically a large French drain for simplicity's sake, right? And then all the water kind of goes through those into the surrounding soil, and then nature's cycle just continues, right? So, there once used to be the old adage that a proper functioning septic system does not need to be pumped. That is wrong, right? They're very much wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. That is not how that works. And that has been proven time and time again by the EPA. Multiple universities, it seems like Indiana and University of Maryland seem to be pumping out a ton of information on that. No health department says that that's good. Multiple health departments in our state of Maryland actually give homeowners rebates to get them to try and pump the septic systems because it does help make the systems last longer. So that brings us back to why we're here. How do you know when it's time to pump the tank? So the first thing that you want to do is figure out when was the last time that this system was pumped. We generally recommend to pump the tanks every 2 to 5 years, right? It really depends on your usage, your health, your lifestyle, how many people live there, and then what kind of products you're putting down the toilet, right? Are you using the really, really expensive premium, plushy, super thick toilet paper because that's going to build up the solids faster? Maybe somebody's got a garbage disposal and they're just going to town on putting those potato peels down the drain. Maybe you've got a bunch of children, right? You got a family of 6, you got a family of 8. You're just got a ton of people living in that household. And so you guys are putting all sorts of extra work on that system. That's okay. The product that we usually use to measure the sludge inside of a tank is called a sludge judge. It's a fancy poop hole, essentially. Basically what it is just going to be a large stick with a ping pong ball on the bottom of it. And what you do is you put a core sample of the tank, and it'll basically help you figure out how full it is. As you flush stuff down the toilet, right, the solids will go into the tank and they'll settle out. Those solids will eventually build up to the point that they actually can start to escape the tank and go out into the drain field. The sizing of the tank is very important, right? So in our area, they're going to size the tanks on the bedroom count of the home. Some areas may do the square footage of the house, some may do the occupancy status, etc. But in our area, we go with bedroom count. And every bedroom, we assume 2 occupants in that bedroom. So what that means is if you've got 2 occupants in a bedroom, if you got a 4-bedroom house, that house should be able to support 8 people, right? Should being the operative word. Older systems generally would be a time and a half of whatever the design flow was, but we'll get to that in a few seconds. So we have our bedroom count, we know it's 4, we know our design flow is going to be 8 people, right? Well, now we need to figure out how much water those 8 people are going to produce. So in our area, depending on what system you look at, the state considers 75 gallons of water per person per day. whereas the federal government will usually assume 100 gallons of water per person per day. But for simplicity's sake, we'll just say 75. So you got an 8-person household in a 4-bedroom home, right? You got 600 gallons of water that's going to go through that system every single day. 600 gallons of water sounds like a lot, but if you spread that out over 24 hours, it's really not that much. And even then, a majority of your usage is going to be in the morning, right? When you wake up in the morning, you're getting the kids ready for school or work or whatever, and then it'll go down in the afternoon. And then it'll pick back up in the evening, right, when you come home from work. Very similar trend to how our electricity usage works. So when you're trying to design this flow, you need to accommodate for the daily usage, but also for those peaks and valleys. So that's why they'll shoot as high as they do to accommodate for those peaks. Because if you use 300 gallons of water in an hour, well, if it's designed for 6, it should be able to handle that relatively with ease. So you know your design flow. We know it's 600 gallons of water for a 4-bedroom house. So what that tells us is, okay, we've got 600 gallons of water per day that's going to be going to this household. We need to have at least double of the capacity of the tank. The reason you want to have double capacity in the tank is to give enough time for that toilet water to basically dissipate. You want to have, from the time you flush that toilet to the time that water exits that septic tank, about 2 days worth of sitting there. And the best way to kind of visualize what's going on is get a cup of water and get some bread yeast. Mix it all together and give it a good spin. Let it sit on the counter, right? You let that thing sit for about a half hour. You'll see that there's going to be a real thick, heavy, yeasty layer on the bottom, more brown in the middle, and like a white foamy stuff on the top, right? Same concept as what's going on inside of a septic system. But we now need to figure out, well, what happens with that water? So we have our water come in, right? We have 600 gallons of flow per day. That means the minimum size tank that we want to see on that house is going to be about a 1,200 gallon tank. Well, I don't know about your area, but in our area, tanks come in 750 gallons, 1,000 gallons, 1,250, 1,500, and 2,000. There's going to be oddballs every now and again, depending on if you're on the edges of the state or whatever. But in central Maryland, that's basically what you're going to find. Nowadays, with modern code, you're going to see a 1,500 gallon tank just about for every system, no matter what. We use a 1,500 gallon 2-chamber tank. I've covered that before in other videos, so don't worry about that right now. But right now, we want to know about the sizing. So we know in our 4-bedroom house, we need at least 1,200 gallons of water, or of capacity. We know that 1,250 is the mid-size between 1,000 and 1,500. So that means that's the size tank you need to see for a 4-bedroom house in order to get adequate separation of solids to go through the system. So in our area, a 1,250 tank generally will have ballpark 4.5 to 5 feet of water in the tank. So you got about 60 inches of total liquid inside of the system. So the way that MALPA, which is our professionals association, has given guidance on when to determine if the septic needs to be pumped is at 30%, right? So if you've got 60 inches of total solid or total liquid depth, once you start getting between 16 to 20 inches of solids, that's when they consider it time to pump the tank. Pumping the tank is going to basically be where they open the lid, take a giant vacuum truck, and suck out all that goodness out of the tank, right? The benefit of doing this is that it will remove the solids and it will help to prolong the life of your absorption system. Biomat and poo essentially is what causes the drain fields to plug up and become oversaturated. By eliminating that, you will get a longer lifespan out of the system. This has been proven time and again by multiple universities and federal agencies. Now, 30% is our guidelines. If you go, let's just say that you measure in May and you're at 30%, and then you wait until August, measure again, and you're at 31%, it doesn't mean that your system's going to fail. It doesn't mean you're going to get in trouble. It doesn't mean anything's going to stop working. It just means you waited a little bit longer than you ought to, right? But you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you get onto it fairly regularly. So we know that our sizing of the tank is based off the occupancy status. We know that 30% is our magic number, but that still doesn't really help us figure out how often we need to get it pumped. So now it comes down to figuring out our occupancy status, right? So if we've got a family of 4, which is your most common sizing, right, moving into the house, generally a family of 4 will need to pump their tank every 2 to 3 years, right? I generally will recommend for every additional occupant that you add onto your house, you either increase or decrease your pumping volume by 6 months. So if you have a 2-year family of 4, right? So a family of 4 that pumps their tank every 2 years, if you make a 5th person join that household, you should do it every 18 months, give or take. If you go to a 3rd person, you should do it every 2.5 years. It just depends on what your status is and where you're at. The best practice that I give everybody is, if you're thinking about when should I pump the tank, get it pumped. Most contractors in our area, I would say almost 90% of them, what they'll do is they will actually measure the sludge in the tank and tell you, hey, this is where you're at. We're going to pump it, but maybe next time let's wait 2 years. Maybe next time let's wait 3 years. After a few pump cycles, you'll eventually kind of figure out what your optimal pumping schedule is. It will take some time. It's not an immediate, like, I know exactly what's going on. I would also recommend that if you're used to a house that's every 2 years and you move to a different house with a different septic system, you should consider going back to a normal 1 to 2 year schedule, because the bacteria is going to be different. The bacteria that's already in that tank is going to be different from the bacteria that's in your gut. So that biome is going to act a little bit silly. So it might take 1 or 2 pumps before you actually get it to start back to where you were at your previous home, right? Septic systems act in some weird ways. There's a science to it, but with all science, it does take time, and you got to make sure you chart it. So the best practice that I would give, pump your tank every 2 to 3 years, right? If you pump between 2 and 5, you'll usually be okay. If you have more than 4 people living in that household, I generally would not go beyond 3 or 4 years. And the reason also for doing it every few years is you're going to have somebody who knows what they're looking at, getting eyes on that system far more regularly than you probably would otherwise, right? Septic systems fail slowly. They don't just overnight fail. If it overnight fails, that means you're in the water table and somebody probably installed that poorly, or something else around the property changed. A septic system should take quite a while to go bad, and generally there'll be several signs to tell you that something's going wrong, right? So if you have a drain field that is no longer functional, sometimes it'll surface, but not always. Usually how you'll figure out is the pumper will tell you, hey, pulled off the lid to this septic system. There's all sorts of toilet paper in the clean out. We might want to investigate a little bit further, right? Those are the times that you're going to really kind of figure out. When somebody tells you you want to investigate because we saw a backup, you should, right? Don't cheap out on it. Don't not do it. It can get very expensive very quickly, especially if it's something stupid like a baffle missing. That doesn't cost very much, but if you don't fix a baffle, it can cost way more, because now you have to replace the drain fields, right? I hope that this helped provide a little bit more clarity and a little bit more math and science to why and how you go about knowing when it's time to pump your septic. If you enjoyed content like this, or if you have any questions, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment. I get to all of them as fast as I can. And if you have a specific area of conversation you want me to start talking about, please leave a comment. I try to take whatever guidance you guys have and create my content around that. Until next time.